I'm sitting in my car right now, in the driveway of this place I've called home for 8 years, and I can't bring myself to go inside. The summer heat is pressing down on everything, making the air thick and heavy, and even with the engine off, I'm sweating through my teal tracksuit. You know, the one I bought when I still walked every morning around the neighborhood? That feels like a lifetime ago. I came home from school pickup 5 minutes ago, and my daughter's words are still ringing in my ears. Mama, why do you smell like Daddy? That simple question, asked so innocently while she was climbing into her car seat, just broke something open in me. And now I have to tell you what's been happening. I never thought I'd actually say this out loud. The steering wheel is hot under my palms, even though I've been sitting here with the engine off. My hands are trembling slightly, the way they do when you're about to do something you can't take back. Through the windshield, I can see the front door of the apartment, the brass knocker catching the afternoon sun, and I keep thinking about all the times I've walked through that door carrying groceries, carrying hope, carrying the weight of trying to make everything okay. Today feels different. Today that door looks like the entrance to a prison I've been pretending was a home. My name is Margaret, and I'm 75 years old. I lived most of my life doing everything right, raised 3 children, worked as a nurse for 42 years, went to church every Sunday, kept my house clean, pressed flowers in my Bible as a quiet little hobby that made me feel close to God. I had a pension coming, decent savings. I wasn't rich, but I was independent. Then my husband got sick, or at least, that's what he told me he was. See, he came back from a doctor's visit one day saying his heart was failing, that he needed medication, special care, monitoring. He said his condition was unpredictable and dangerous. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband of 53 years, but what he really needed wasn't a nurse. He needed control. And he used those fake diagnoses like a weapon. He said he couldn't be left alone, that he needed me home all the time. He'd complain about chest pains whenever I wanted to go anywhere, have episodes right before I was supposed to meet friends. The doctors never found anything wrong, but I kept believing him. I kept thinking it was real, that he really did need me, that leaving him alone even for an hour could kill him. I remember the first time he had one of those episodes. I was getting dressed to go to my book club, the one that met every other Tuesday at the library downtown. I'd been looking forward to it all week because we were discussing a novel I'd actually finished, one of those sweeping family sagas that reminded me why I loved reading in the first place. I was wearing my good blue cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons, and I'd even put on lipstick. I felt like myself for the first time in weeks. Then he called out from the bedroom. His voice had this strained quality, breathy and weak. When I rushed in, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed to his chest, his face contorted. "It's happening again," he said. "The pain. Margaret, I don't think you should go out tonight. What if something happens while you're gone?" I stood there in that doorway, my purse already on my shoulder, keys in hand, and I felt this war happening inside me. Part of me knew somewhere deep down that the timing was too convenient. But the louder part, the part that had been trained by 53 years of marriage and a lifetime of being told that women exist to care for others, that part said, what if he's telling the truth? What if you leave and he dies and you could have prevented it? So I stayed. I called Barbara from the book club and made some excuse about not feeling well. I hung up my good blue cardigan. I wiped off the lipstick, and I sat with him while he lay in bed, watching television, his episode mysteriously fading once the time for book club had passed. He even got up later to make himself a sandwich, moving through the kitchen with no apparent discomfort whatsoever. But by then, it was too late. I'd already missed it, already chosen him over myself. And that became the pattern. Over and over and over again. I blamed myself for every symptom he described. If his blood pressure was high, it was because I'd upset him. If he had trouble sleeping, I must have done something wrong. That's what he told me, and God help me, I believed it. You internalize these things. You start thinking you're the problem. You think you deserve it. But before I tell you about how it all fell apart, I want you to understand how much I cared about this story reaching the right people. If you're listening to this and something sounds familiar, if you know someone who might be going through something like this, please hit that like button and subscribe. Not for me, but because this message needs to find the person who desperately needs to hear it today. Sometimes one story can change everything. This converted attic apartment we moved into after selling our house, it's got sloped ceilings and just one window that faces the street. The whole place smells like old wood and dust no matter how much I clean. There's a crocheted blanket draped over the arm of the sofa, something I made years ago when my hands were steadier, when I had time for things like that. Now when I look at it, I just see all the hours I should have been paying attention to what was really happening. The apartment itself tells the story of how far we'd fallen, though I didn't see it at the time. We'd sold our 3-bedroom ranch house, the one with the garden where I grew tomatoes and herbs, the one with the porch where we'd watch thunderstorms roll in on summer evenings. That house had been paid off for 15 years. We had equity, stability, a place that was truly ours. But he said we needed the money for his medical expenses, that downsizing would reduce stress, that a smaller place would be easier for me to manage while caring for him. So we sold it, got a good price too, nearly $200,000. That money went into an account in his name for medical management, he said. I never saw most of it again. The day we moved into this attic apartment, I stood in the middle of the empty main room and felt something crack inside my chest. The ceiling sloped so dramatically that you could only stand up straight in the center of the room. The single window was small and faced a brick wall across the narrow street. The bedroom was barely big enough for a queen bed. The kitchen was a galley with old appliances and counters that had been worn down to the bare wood in places. This wasn't downsizing, this was disappearing. The rural outskirts of Memphis aren't like the city proper. Out here, it's mobile homes and wide open sky, heat that settles over everything like a wool blanket you can't shake off. The fan in my apartment spins all day long, every day, just moving hot air from one corner to another. I used to love summer. Now it just reminds me of being trapped. Our neighbors in this area were mostly working people struggling to get by, families living paycheck to paycheck in mobile homes that had been there since the 70s. There was a kind of quiet dignity in how they managed their lives, maintaining their small properties, looking out for each other. I'd see them sometimes, the woman next door watering her flower boxes in the early morning before the heat became unbearable, the man across the way working on his truck in the driveway, always tinkering, always fixing something. They'd wave at me sometimes when I was sitting by my window. I'd wave back, but I never had the energy to go outside and talk. I was too busy being needed inside, too busy managing symptoms that didn't exist. The financial part started small. He said he needed money for specialist appointments that didn't exist. Then it was medication costs. Then it was debts he'd racked up that came from his stress about his health. I had about $280,000 in my pension fund, the money I'd saved carefully over 4 decades of 12-hour nursing shifts. Over 8 years it all went, every penny. I transferred it to accounts he controlled, paid off credit cards in his name, gave him cash whenever he asked. I thought I was saving his life. I thought that's what marriage meant. That's what a good wife does. Those 12-hour shifts I'd worked to build that pension, they flooded back to me sometimes in the quiet moments. I'd remember being 35 years old, working the night shift at Memphis General, running between patients in the intensive care unit. My feet would ache so badly by hour 10 that I'd have to sit down during breaks and ice them. I'd get home at 7 in the morning, sleep for 4 hours, wake up to take care of my kids, and then do it all over again. Holidays, weekends, birthdays, I worked through all of it. Because I believed in building something, I believed that hard work would create security, that if I just saved carefully enough, invested wisely enough, I'd have a comfortable retirement. I'd be able to travel, maybe, visit my children without worrying about the cost of a plane ticket, buy Christmas presents for my grandchildren without calculating whether I could afford it. That was the dream. A simple, modest dream of financial peace after a lifetime of labor. And he took it. All of it. Every shift I'd worked through a migraine. Every holiday I'd missed with my family. Every aching step I'd taken down hospital corridors at 3 in the morning. He converted my entire life's work into a luxury car and casino trips, and a lifestyle I never even got to witness. I remember pressing flowers between the pages of my Bible during those years, these tiny moments of peace where I could pretend everything was normal. Pansies mostly because they grew wild near the mailbox. I'd carefully place them between the Psalms, close the book gently, stack something heavy on top. Weeks later I'd open it, and there they'd be, perfectly preserved but colorless, all the life pressed out of them. I didn't realize I was looking at a metaphor for my own existence. There was something meditative about the process of pressing flowers, something that felt like prayer without words. I'd go out in the early morning before the heat became oppressive, before he woke up and needed something. The pansies grew in this little patch near the mailbox, these small, brave faces in purple and yellow, turning toward whatever light they could find. I'd kneel there in the grass, which was always a little damp with dew, and I'd select the prettiest ones. Not the biggest, but the ones with the most perfect petals, the ones that seemed to have something to say. I'd carry them inside like precious things, which they were to me. Then I'd open my Bible, usually to Psalms because that's where I spent most of my reading time anyway. Those ancient songs of praise and lament, and I'd arrange the flowers carefully between the pages. The weight of other books on top would press them flat over the course of weeks, preserving their shape even as it drained their color. When I'd find them again months later, they'd be like ghosts of themselves. Still beautiful in a way, but emptied out, haunted. I cooked for him constantly. Fresh cornbread cooling on the counter, the smell filling that small apartment, golden and warm. He'd complain it was too dry or too sweet, or I'd use the wrong pan. Nothing was ever quite right. But I kept making it because I thought maybe the next batch would be the one that made him happy, the one that proved I was trying hard enough. The kitchen became my prison and my refuge all at once. I had my grandmother's cornbread recipe, the one that had been passed down through 3 generations. It was written on an index card in her handwriting. The ink faded, but still legible. 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 cup of flour, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 egg, 1 cup of milk, 1/4 cup of melted butter. Mix it all together, pour it into a greased iron skillet, bake at 400 degrees for 20 minutes. Simple, foolproof. My grandmother had made that cornbread every Sunday after church for 50 years. My mother had made it for every family dinner. I'd made it countless times in my own kitchen, and it always turned out perfect. Golden brown on top, slightly crispy at the edges, moist and tender in the middle. People used to ask me for the recipe, used to tell me it was the best cornbread they'd ever tasted. But in that attic apartment, following that same recipe with the same measurements, it was never good enough for him. Too dry, too crumbly, too dense, not enough butter, too much butter. The criticism changed every time, which should have been my first clue that the problem wasn't the cornbread. But I kept trying. I'd adjust the recipe, add more milk, less milk, use a different pan, change the oven temperature. I'd stand at that counter with my grandmother's index card, staring at her handwriting, wondering what I was doing wrong, what I was missing, how I could fail at something I'd been doing successfully for decades. On Sundays, we still went to church when he felt up to it. I'd sit in the pew with my paper church fan, the kind with the funeral home advertisement on the back, waving it slowly back and forth while the preacher talked about sacrifice and devotion and putting others before yourself. And I'd think, yes, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what love looks like. This is the cross I'm meant to bear. Our church was a small Baptist congregation, the kind where everybody knows everybody and your business is never quite your own. The building itself was old, built in the 1940s, with white clapboard siding and a modest steeple. Inside, the pews were wooden and uncomfortable, worn smooth by generations of worshipers. The sanctuary had ceiling fans that turned slowly during services, barely moving the hot air around. That's why everyone had their own paper fan, the kind that funeral homes gave out as advertisement. Mine had Eternal Rest Funeral Home, printed on the back with a phone number and a picture of their building. I'd wave it during the service, this little rhythm that helped me feel like I was doing something while sitting still. Pastor Williams was a good man, in his 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle way of preaching that never felt judgmental. He talked a lot about service, about putting others first, about how marriage was a covenant that required sacrifice and endurance. I'd listen to those sermons and feel affirmed in my suffering. This was what I was supposed to do. This was what God wanted from me. Endure. Sacrifice. Serve. Never mind that I was disappearing. Never mind that my health was failing. Never mind that I was being drained of everything that made me myself. That was the cost of being a good Christian wife, wasn't it? That was the narrow path. Looking back, I don't think Pastor Williams meant his sermons that way. I think he was talking about the normal give and take of relationships, the compromises and accommodations that any partnership requires. But when you're in an abusive situation, You hear everything through a filter. You take messages about sacrifice and service, and you use them as justification for accepting the unacceptable. You weaponize grace against yourself. My daughter would visit sometimes with her little girl, my granddaughter who's 6 now and asks the most devastating questions. They'd sit on that sofa with the crocheted blanket, and I'd make myself smile, make myself seem fine, even though I was disappearing piece by piece. My daughter knew something was wrong, but I couldn't tell her. I was too ashamed, too convinced it was somehow my fault. Those visits were the hardest part of maintaining the facade. My daughter, Jennifer, she's sharp, always has been. Even as a child, she could see through nonsense and pretense. She'd look at me with these worried eyes and ask if I was okay, if I needed anything, if something was wrong. And I'd smile and say I was fine, just tired, just adjusting to the new place, just busy taking care of Dad. The lies came easier than I expected. Or maybe they weren't lies so much as a desperate wish that if I said I was fine enough times, it would become true. My granddaughter, Sophie, she didn't have that filter yet. She'd look at me with 6-year-old directness and ask why I was so skinny, why my hands shook, why Grandpa was always asleep when they visited. She'd ask if I wanted to come to her house instead, if I wanted to play at the park, if I wanted to do anything fun. And I'd have to tell her no, Grandpa needed me here. Maybe another time, we'd see. Watching her little face fall, seeing her accept that Grandma wasn't available, that hurt more than anything he did to me directly. Jennifer started bringing groceries without asking if we needed them. She'd show up with bags of food and just put them away in my tiny kitchen, chatting about nothing in particular, not making it a big deal. I knew she'd noticed how thin I'd gotten. I knew she'd seen that our cupboards were nearly empty. But she didn't confront me about it. She just quietly tried to help in ways that wouldn't trigger my defenses or my shame. I gave up everything. That morning walk I used to take in my teal tracksuit, the one where I'd say hello to neighbors and watch the sun come up over the mobile homes, that stopped years ago. He needed me home. My book club? Gone. My volunteer work at the hospital? Gone. Friends stopped calling because I'd canceled so many times. My world shrank down to that attic apartment and his needs and his episodes and his endless, crushing dependency that I now know was completely manufactured. The morning walks had been my favorite part of the day. I'd wake up at 6 before the heat set in, and I'd put on my teal tracksuit and my good walking shoes. The neighborhood was quiet at that hour, just the sound of birds and the occasional car. I'd walk the same route every day, about 2 miles around the mobile home park and the surrounding streets. I'd wave at the few other early risers, people walking their dogs or leaving for early shifts. There was a community in those morning greetings, a sense of belonging to something larger than myself. And the sunrise out here, with nothing to block the horizon, it was spectacular. All those colors spreading across the sky, the way the light would change from pink to orange to gold. It felt like a gift every single morning, like the world was making something beautiful just for anyone paying attention. But then he started saying he felt worse in the mornings, that he needed me there when he woke up, that leaving him alone even for 45 minutes was too risky. The first few times I believed it and stayed home. Then it became the new normal. My walking shoes sat by the door for months, then years, collecting dust. My teal tracksuit hung in the closet, barely worn. My morning greeting friends probably thought I'd moved away or died. I just vanished from that small community without explanation. The money left my accounts in steady streams. $5,000 here for a specialist in Nashville who never existed. $8,000 there for cardiac equipment he supposedly needed. $12,000 for an experimental treatment. I signed everything. I authorized every transfer because I believed him when he said his life depended on it. And when you believe you're keeping someone alive with your money, you'll give every dollar you have. Each transfer felt like a crisis averted, a disaster prevented. He'd come to me with such urgency, such apparent need. The specialist in Nashville had a cancellation, but we had to pay up front, had to secure the appointment before someone else took it. The cardiac equipment was on sale, but only for this week, and insurance wouldn't cover it, but he couldn't live without it. The experimental treatment had a waiting list, but a generous donation could move us up, could save his life before it was too late. Every single time, there was urgency. Every single time there was a deadline. Every single time I believed that hesitation could equal death. I'd go to the bank and make the transfers or withdrawals, and the tellers would look at me with concern. Especially Maria, this young woman who'd helped me set up my pension account years earlier. She'd seen how much I had saved, she'd congratulated me on my careful planning, and now she was watching it all drain away in large, frequent transactions. One day she asked me, very gently, if everything was okay, if I was sure about these withdrawals, if maybe I wanted to talk to a financial advisor before continuing. And I smiled at her and said I was fine. My husband needed medical care. It was all necessary. She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She knew. Somewhere she knew. But what could she do? I was competent. I was authorizing the transactions willingly. There was no legal basis for her to stop me from giving away my own money. I wish I'd listened to that worry in her eyes. I wish I'd asked myself why she looked so concerned. But I was too deep in the fog by then, too committed to the narrative I'd accepted. And asking questions felt like betrayal, like I was doubting my husband, doubting his need, doubting my own purpose as his caretaker. I remember the day I couldn't afford my own medication anymore. Blood pressure pills I'd taken for 15 years. I just stopped taking them because there wasn't money left, and his needs had to come first. That's when my body started keeping score, even if my mind wouldn't admit what was happening. The pharmacist called me when I didn't pick up my refill. Same pharmacy I'd been using for 20 years, where they knew me by name, knew my prescriptions by heart. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "you're overdue for your lisinopril. Do you want me to fill it?" And I had to tell her no, not this month, maybe next month. She paused. Then she said, "Mrs. Thompson, blood pressure medication isn't something you should skip. This is important for your health." And I said I knew, I understood, but it wasn't possible right now. She offered to call my doctor to see if there was a generic option or a patient assistance program. And I just said no thank you and hung up. My blood pressure medication cost $43 a month. $43. That was all that stood between me and a medical crisis. And I couldn't afford it because I just transferred $8,000 for equipment that didn't exist. The math was insane. The priorities were inverted. But I was operating in a reality where his needs, his claimed needs, were absolute and non-negotiable, and my actual documented medical needs were optional and deferrable. Within 3 weeks of stopping my medication, I started getting headaches, then dizziness, then this constant feeling of pressure in my chest, like something was squeezing my heart. I should have gone to the doctor. I should have at least checked my blood pressure at one of those machines they have in pharmacies. But I didn't. Because I couldn't afford the doctor. Because I was afraid of what the numbers would say. Because acknowledging my own medical crisis would have forced me to confront the fact that I was sacrificing my actual health for his fictional health. He bought a pearl-white Mercedes S-Class. I saw it parked in a lot downtown one day when my daughter drove me to a doctor's appointment. I asked him about it later, casual, just curious. He said it belonged to his cardiologist, that the man had given him a ride once when his truck wouldn't start. The lie came so easily. He didn't even blink. And I accepted it because accepting it was easier than believing my husband of 53 years would steal my life savings to buy a luxury car. But the thing about lies is they leave traces. Paper trails, digital footprints, evidence that eventually surfaces no matter how careful someone thinks they're being. My daughter's mother-in-law worked in accounts payable at the regional bank, and she happened to mention seeing some unusual transactions. Just a casual comment at a family dinner. "Your husband sure is making some interesting purchases," she'd said with a little laugh, not knowing what she was opening up. I felt my chest tighten, but I smiled and changed the subject. But that night I couldn't sleep. The fan spun overhead, that same eternal rotation, and I kept thinking about what she'd said. Interesting purchases? What did that mean? In the morning, while he was out, supposedly at physical therapy, I logged into our bank accounts for the first time in months. I'd let him handle everything because he said the stress of managing finances would worsen his condition. The receipts started surfacing. Mercedes dealership payments, just like I'd suspected, but also jewelry store charges from places I'd never been. Casino receipts from Las Vegas, trips I didn't know he'd taken, hotel charges in cities across the South, a whole second life I knew nothing about. And every single charge was in his name, on my money, my pension, my 4 decades of night shifts and double shifts and saving carefully. I printed everything. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. And I sat at that kitchen table where I'd made so much cornbread, where I'd tried so hard to be good enough, and I just stared at the evidence of my own stupidity. That's what I thought then. That I was stupid, that I should have known, that I'd failed some basic test of intelligence or awareness. The crocheted blanket was still on the sofa where my granddaughter had left it after her last visit. She'd been pretending it was a cape, running around the apartment playing superhero. I picked it up and held it against my face and cried harder than I've ever cried in my life. All those hours I'd spent making something beautiful, something meant to keep people warm, and I couldn't even keep myself safe. That's when my body just stopped. I'm talking about the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I was getting ready to make cornbread for dinner, walking from the table to the stove with the receipts still scattered everywhere, and I just froze. Couldn't move my hands, couldn't move my feet. My mind was screaming, but my body had shut down completely. I stood there paralyzed, aware of everything but unable to do anything about it. I was stuck in that kitchen for 3 hours until my daughter found me. She'd stopped by to drop off some groceries, and when I didn't answer the door, she used her key. Found me standing there, silent, tears dried on my face, completely non-responsive. She called an ambulance. The EMTs couldn't find anything physically wrong. At the hospital, they ran tests, did scans, checked everything. The doctors called it a physical response to trauma. My body had finally told the truth that my brain couldn't accept. When I could speak again, when movement came back, I was different. Something had broken and healed wrong, or maybe healed right for the first time. I couldn't pretend anymore. The facade I'd maintained for 8 years had shattered along with my nervous system. My daughter sat by my hospital bed and held my hand and asked me, very quietly, what was really going on. And I told her everything. The fake diagnoses, the medical control, the money, all of it. She cried. I cried. And then she got angry in that fierce, protective way that children get when they realize their parent has been hurt. When I got home from the hospital, he was angry that I'd worried everyone, that I'd caused a scene, that the ambulance had cost money we supposedly didn't have. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked why I'd been so careless, so dramatic. And in that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that he'd never loved me at all. He'd needed me. He'd used me. But love? No. That had never been part of this equation. I started keeping the receipts I'd printed in a folder hidden in my Bible, tucked between the pressed flowers, evidence and beauty existing side by side. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with them, but I knew I needed to keep them safe. Some instinct for self-preservation that had finally woken up. The summer heat that year felt unbearable. Every day the same oppressive weight, the fan spinning uselessly, the apartment trapping all that hot air. I'd sit by the one window and look out at the mobile homes and the wide sky and think about all the ways a person could disappear. Not die, just cease to exist as themselves while their body kept going through the motions. I stopped cooking for him. Stopped making that cornbread he always criticized. He'd complain, and I'd just look at him blankly and say I wasn't feeling well enough, which was true. I wasn't well. I might never be well again, but I was done performing wellness for his benefit. My daughter started coming over more often, staying longer. She'd bring my granddaughter, and we'd play games or read stories while he sat in the bedroom complaining about being ignored. Her presence was a shield. He couldn't maintain his performance as thoroughly with witnesses. The mask would slip. That's when I reached out. I called Adult Protective Services. The words felt impossible in my mouth. I'm being abused by my husband, financially, medically. I'm 75 years old and I need help. The woman on the phone was kind. She didn't make me feel stupid. She said someone would come by, that I'd done the right thing by calling. A social worker named Thomas came to see me on a Thursday afternoon. He was maybe 40, with kind eyes and a gentle way of asking questions that didn't feel like interrogation. He sat at my kitchen table and let me talk. Really talk. I showed him the receipts, the bank statements, the medical records showing no cardiac issues despite years of claimed symptoms. He took notes and nodded and told me that what was happening had a name. Elder financial abuse. Coercive control using health as a weapon. Thomas had a way of explaining things that made me feel less alone. He said he'd seen this pattern before, many times, that it was common for abusers to use medical needs as justification for control, that it was particularly effective with people who had nursing backgrounds because we were conditioned to believe medical emergencies and to prioritize care over everything else. He said the fake symptoms, the convenient timing of episodes, the way my freedom was restricted through medical necessity, all of it was textbook coercive control. He had a term for it, medical abuse, using healthcare as a weapon. Hearing that there was a name for it, that it was recognized and documented and studied, that changed something fundamental. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being oversensitive. This was a real thing that happened to real people, and there were professionals who knew how to identify it and respond to it. That validation, after so many years of questioning my own perceptions, after so many years of being told I was overreacting, or not understanding, or not being supportive enough, that validation felt like oxygen after drowning. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. It was real, and it had a pattern, and other people knew how to help. That validation, after years of questioning my own perception, after years of being told I was oversensitive, or misunderstanding, or not supportive enough, that validation was oxygen after drowning. Thomas helped me understand my options: legal recourse, protective orders, police reports. But he also said something that surprised me. He said that leaving, just getting out safely, might matter more than justice right now. That my safety and sanity were worth more than any amount of money or punishment. That surviving was its own form of winning. I started planning my exit in secret. Opened a new bank account at a different bank across town, one he'd never used. Got a small P.O. box for mail he couldn't intercept. Started moving what little money I had left. Tiny amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts. $60 here, $40 there. Building up a small emergency fund that was entirely mine. Opening that new bank account felt like an act of rebellion and terror all at once. I took the bus to a branch on the other side of Memphis, far from anywhere we usually went. I wore sunglasses like I was doing something shameful, like I was the criminal. The banker who helped me was a young man named David, probably in his late 20s, and he was patient with me as I fumbled through the paperwork. My hands were shaking. I kept looking over my shoulder even though there was no way my husband could know where I was. When David asked if I wanted to add another name to the account, a joint holder, I said no so firmly that he looked surprised. "Just me," I said. "Only my name. No one else." He nodded and processed the paperwork, and when he handed me the temporary debit card, I felt like I was holding something precious and dangerous. This card represented money that was mine, that I controlled, that couldn't be taken without my permission. It was the first step toward autonomy. It was terrifying. It took 3 months of careful, quiet preparation. 3 months of pretending everything was normal while I dismantled his control piece by piece. I told my daughter what I was doing and swore her to secrecy. She wanted me to leave immediately, but I knew I had to do this methodically. No room for mistakes. I picked a date, July 15th, my granddaughter's birthday. I told him I was going to stay with my daughter for a week to help with the birthday party and the guests and the chaos. He didn't want me to go, of course, said his heart was acting up, said he needed me home. But I went anyway. Packed my important documents, my pressed flowers, that crocheted blanket. Everything that mattered to me fit in 2 suitcases. My daughter picked me up while he was supposedly at an appointment. I got in her car, and I didn't look back at that attic apartment. I was shaking, but I was moving forward. That was what mattered. I never went back. Instead, I went to a journalist at the Memphis Press who was doing a story on elder abuse in rural communities. Thomas had given me her name. I called her and said I had a story to tell. We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from anywhere he might see us. I told her everything. The fake diagnoses, the money, the 8 years of control. She listened and took notes and asked if I'd be willing to use my real name. I thought about it. Using my real name meant exposure, meant people knowing what had happened to me, meant admitting publicly that I'd been fooled, used, stripped of nearly $300,000. But it also meant he couldn't hide anymore, meant other people in similar situations might find courage. So I said yes. Yes. Use my real name. Margaret. I'm Margaret, and this is what happened to me. When that story ran, it opened something up in this community. People started coming forward. His car dealer called the newspaper because he'd bounced checks on the Mercedes. His doctor called because he was furious about being mentioned in a fraud scheme, about having his name attached to fake diagnoses. The web of lies started unraveling in public. Other women reached out to the journalist. Elderly women who'd gone through similar things, who'd been controlled through fake illnesses, who'd lost their savings to husbands or children or caregivers who exploited their trust. We weren't alone. That's what I learned. We weren't isolated cases of stupidity or weakness. This was a pattern, a recognizable form of abuse that happened to thousands of people. My church community rallied around me, which I hadn't expected. I thought they'd judge me for leaving my husband, for making our private business public. But instead, the pastor's wife organized meals. Women from my old Bible study started visiting. They brought casseroles and hugs and stories of their own difficulties. The church fan I'd waved for so many years while absorbing sermons about wifely duty, it turned out that same church could also understand protection and boundaries. He tried to fight back, called my daughter crying, saying I'd abandoned him, that his health was deteriorating without me. She hung up on him. He showed up at the church one Sunday and caused a scene. The pastor asked him to leave. He hired a lawyer who sent threatening letters about defamation. My lawyer, provided through Adult Protective Services, sent better letters back. The thing is, he kept the money. The legal system moved slowly, and he had better lawyers, and proving financial abuse when you voluntarily sign documents is complicated. The court case dragged on. Evidence was disputed. His defense claimed I'd given gifts, that I'd been aware and willing. The Mercedes was in his name. The casino charges could have been mine, they argued. Who's to say? Justice didn't work the way I hoped it would. He didn't go to jail. He didn't have to pay restitution. The system that was supposed to protect people like me just ground along slowly until eventually my lawyer said we could keep fighting, or we could accept that legal justice might not come, that sometimes people get away with it. But something else happened. When my story was public, I stopped being ashamed. I stopped blaming myself. The comments on the newspaper article online were mostly supportive. People shared their own stories. People said I was brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt exhausted and angry and cheated. But I wasn't hiding anymore. And that changed everything. The court case finally settled with a whimper. No admission of wrongdoing, no financial penalty. He kept everything he'd taken, but there was a restraining order. He couldn't contact me, couldn't come within 500 feet of my daughter's house where I was staying. That felt like something. Not justice, but safety. And maybe safety mattered more. After everything settled, after the legal dust cleared and the newspaper story became old news, after people stopped asking me how I was doing with that particular tone of voice, something unexpected happened. He reached out through a mutual friend asking to meet. Said he wanted to apologize, said he'd realized what he'd done, said he wanted to make amends. My daughter begged me not to go. Thomas advised against it. But I went anyway. Met him at a public park with my daughter waiting in the car nearby. He looked older, smaller somehow, like confronting consequences had diminished him physically. He did apologize, sort of. Said he'd been stressed, that his actual health issues had gotten confused with exaggeration, that he'd made mistakes with money management. He didn't admit to fraud, didn't admit to deliberately faking symptoms or stealing. Just mistakes, stress, unfortunate circumstances. And then he asked if I'd consider coming back. Said he'd changed, said he needed me. I looked at this man I'd spent 53 years with and felt absolutely nothing. Not love, not hate, not even pity. Just a vast emptiness where all those complicated feelings used to be. And I realized that was the real justice, not a court ruling or financial restitution, but complete indifference. He couldn't hurt me anymore because I didn't care what he thought or felt or needed. I told him no, very calmly. No, I won't come back. No, I don't forgive you. No, your apology doesn't change anything. And then I walked away. Got in my daughter's car, and we drove off. And I felt lighter than I had in 8 years. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've been rebuilding. Actually rebuilding, not just surviving. I took a part-time job at a care facility for seniors, working reception 3 days a week. Something I could do with my aging body, something that used my nursing background without being physically demanding. The income is modest, but it's mine. Every dollar I earn is mine. The job at the care facility brought its own kind of healing. I sit at a desk in the bright, clean lobby, and I greet visitors, answer phones, schedule appointments. It's simple work, but it matters. I see families coming to visit their elderly parents, and I watch the dynamics carefully now. I see love and obligation and sometimes resentment, and sometimes that particular kind of exhaustion that comes from long-term caregiving. And occasionally, I see something that looks familiar. A controlling adult child who monitors every conversation, an elderly parent who seems afraid of their supposed caregiver, a pattern of isolation or financial control that makes my instincts prickle. When I see those red flags, I make a point of being extra friendly, of offering resources, of leaving pamphlets about elder services in visible places. I can't save everyone. I can't even be sure I'm reading situations correctly. But I can make sure people know help exists, that there are phone numbers to call, that they're not alone. I learned about financial planning again, starting over at 75 like a teenager getting their first job. Opened a retirement account with what little I could contribute. Started tracking expenses, built a small emergency fund. The money I lost is gone forever, but I could still build something new. It wouldn't be the comfortable retirement I'd planned, but it would be honest. It would be mine. My daughter helped me furnish a small apartment. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom in a safe complex with good lighting and neighbors who check on each other. I brought my crocheted blanket, hung my church fan on the wall as a reminder, planted pansies in a window box, small acts of claiming space and making it home. And last month, I did something I'd never done before. I took the bus somewhere new, just picked a route at random and rode it to the end, got off, walked around. Ended up in this historic neighborhood with beautiful old homes, tree-lined streets, character and charm. Cooper Young, they call it. Artists and families and little cafes. People sitting on porches in the evening. I walked those streets for 2 hours, just looking, imagining living somewhere like that. Not in one of the big houses, I couldn't afford that, but maybe a small apartment in one of the converted buildings. Somewhere with character. Somewhere that felt alive. I picked up information from a realtor's office, started looking at prices. It's not impossible. With my job and careful saving, maybe in a year or two. It's not a Mercedes-Benz S-Class in pearl white, but it's freedom. It's possibility. It's proof that at 75, after losing almost everything, I can still want things, still plan for things, still believe in a future that's better than the past. My granddaughter visits me now at my new apartment. We bake cookies together. She doesn't ask why I smell different anymore, why I don't live with her grandfather. She just knows Grandma has her own place now, and it smells like vanilla and lavender instead of old wood and defeat. That's enough for her. Kids are resilient that way. I still press flowers in my Bible, but now when I open those pages, I see the receipts I kept as evidence, and I think about how survival requires documentation. How speaking truth requires proof. How protecting yourself sometimes means collecting the fragments of harm and holding them up to the light. The summer heat is easier now somehow. Maybe because I control my own thermostat. Maybe because the fan that spins is in a space that's truly mine. Maybe because heat is just heat when you're not trapped. I think about all the years I spent believing his lies about his health. About how I blamed myself for every symptom, every crisis. About how I gave away my financial security because I thought that's what love required. And I want you to understand something crucial. This wasn't about being stupid or weak or gullible. This was about a system of control so gradual and so complete that by the time I realized what was happening, I'd already lost almost everything. The health impact of what I went through, the stress, the frozen episodes, the weight loss, the insomnia, some of that is permanent. My blood pressure never quite stabilized again. I have panic attacks sometimes when I see a pearl white Mercedes. My hands shake when I sign financial documents, even though they're just for routine things. My body remembers even when my mind tries to forget. But I'm healing. I'm here, at 75, rebuilding a life that's actually mine. Working a job I chose. Living in a space I control. Planning a future I want. That's the rebirth part. Not a complete transformation into someone new, but a reclamation of who I was before 8 years of systematic abuse tried to erase me. And here's what I've learned that I need you to understand. I'm not alone in this. The World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 6 seniors worldwide suffers abuse. That's millions of people. Millions of grandmothers and grandfathers being exploited by the people who are supposed to love them. And in America alone, about 4 million seniors are victimized every year. 4 million. Most of us don't talk about it. We're ashamed. We think we caused it. We think we should have known better. But abuse doesn't care how smart you are, or how long you worked, or how hard you tried to do everything right. It finds the gaps in your defenses, your capacity for trust, your willingness to believe the best in people. And it exploits those good qualities until there's nothing left. The physical and mental health consequences are real and documented. Depression, anxiety, increased mortality, cognitive decline. When you spend years in a state of constant stress and hypervigilance, your body pays the price. When you're systematically gaslit and controlled, your mind struggles to trust its own perceptions. The damage goes deeper than bank accounts. If you're reading this and something in my story feels familiar, if you know someone whose health is being used to control them, whose money is disappearing to a spouse or child or caregiver, please listen to that instinct. You're not imagining it. You're not being paranoid. Trust is important, but documentation is better. Bank statements don't lie. Medical records can be verified. Paper trails reveal truth. And if you're the one being abused, if you're sitting in your car right now, unable to go inside because the weight of it is too much, I want you to know something. It's not your fault. You didn't cause this. You don't deserve it. And you can leave. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but you can leave. There are people who will help you. Social workers like Thomas, organizations that specialize in elder protection, journalists who want to tell these stories, churches and community groups who will rally around you. It won't be easy. The legal system might fail you like it failed me. The money might be gone forever. Justice might look different than you hoped. But freedom, actual freedom to control your own life at whatever age you are, that's worth more than any amount of money. That's worth the fear and the uncertainty and the starting over. I'm sitting in my apartment right now, the one I chose, with the crocheted blanket on my sofa and pansies in my window box. The fan spins overhead, but it's a different fan in a different place. The summer heat presses down, but I can leave whenever I want. Take that bus to the historic neighborhood. Walk those tree-lined streets. Imagine futures. My daughter asks me sometimes if I regret not fighting harder in court, if I'm angry that he kept the money. And honestly, some days yes. Some days I'm furious that he got away with it, that the system failed so completely to protect me or punish him. But most days I'm just grateful to be here, to have survived, to have my mind and my body and my autonomy back. The money he took, that was my past, my 4 decades of work. But I still have my future. However many years I get, they're mine now. Every decision, every dollar, every choice, all mine. That's worth more than $280,000. That's worth everything. So, here's my question for you. Have you lived this? Do you know someone who has? Are you watching someone you love get smaller and quieter while their money disappears and their supposed caregiver gets a new car? Are you the one making excuses for why you can't visit friends or why you don't have money for basic needs? If any of this resonates, please reach out. Call Adult Protective Services in your area. Talk to a social worker. Document everything. Tell someone you trust. You don't have to solve it alone. You don't have to be certain before asking for help. Just the question, is this normal, is enough to start. And if you've made it this far in my story, If something here helped you understand your own situation or someone else's better, please like this and share it. Not for me, but because somewhere out there is a 75-year-old woman sitting in her car, unable to go inside, thinking she's the only one. She needs to know she's not alone. She needs to know there's a path forward. She needs to know that at 75 or 85 or any age, it's not too late to reclaim your life. I'm Margaret. I'm 75 years old. I lost nearly everything and I'm rebuilding anyway. And if I can do it, maybe you can too.